My sheep hear my voice. Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome to the Aliyah today. We are in Parashah Vayigash. It's the third Aliyah of our Parashah. Some very interesting insights here I want to be able to cover with you. And I'm going to begin with this discussion of hear my voice. My books fall off there. Here we go. Because this is what inspired the title, of course. By the way, like the video, share it with your friend. But hey, listen, we need to do a even greater effort, and you can help me here. Pardon me, by getting our message out. Right, to know Lapid is to love Lapid. Right, it's true. People who meet us like us, love us. They like it, they love it, they want more of it, right? So help us to do a better job to get the information out there, to get our whole persona out there, right? The more that we can touch people's lives, the better it is. And that's how you dispel myths too, by the way, because people are scared of things they don't know. They hear all the scary things online. Oh, don't follow those people. It's dangerous. I once met a rabbi. This is recent. Back in the last year, and before, is a traditional Orthodox rabbi, and before he met me, we had a scheduled meeting. He had been inundated with just all the nonsense that people can run into out there on the beautiful World Wide Web. And pardon me, he had been told about basically I was the most dangerous man on the planet. I was a reprobate. I was just horrible. All the nonsense, and by the way, everything you read online, can I just tell you about me? It's not true. There's a novel idea. It's baloney. It's, what do I say? It's phony baloney, plastic banana, good time rock and roll. That's all it is. So anyway, he had been inundated with all that stuff, hit with it, but he had the spiritual maturity and wisdom, because he thinks for himself, to meet with me anyway, because what he'd been seeing wasn't quite matching up with all this other, I'm Darth Vader kind of thing. So anyway, we met. It was kind of funny because we walked the door, and first thing he said is, we met, we chatted, and he goes, I was led to believe you're the most dangerous man on the planet, but basically you're just a nice guy. So I say, yeah, that's pretty much how I roll. So let it roll out there. Get it out there. Get this information out there. Listen, the Satan doesn't want it out there. Why? Because it changes people's lives in a positive way. Think about the things that you hear for those of you who are daily listeners. You hear great insights, sure, and all this comes from the sources, by the way. That's the other great thing, is that this is normative Judaism. Everything you hear here, comes from traditional Jewish sources. We cite them all the time. We talk about it all the time. I encourage you to go out and fill your library with them to the extent possible. But then you also hear encouraging things, how to be a better person, how to navigate through life's challenges. Raise your hand out there if you have life and the life has challenges. If you don't have your hand raised, you probably need to see a psychiatrist. You may need to check and see if you're human or not. So anyway, glad you're here. So get out there, share. If we know that the enemy doesn't want us to get the information out, then that means we need to redouble our efforts to get the information out, right? Of course, right. And y'all are good people too. And so people run into you guys and they say, hey, look at these smart people. These are good people. Now, we've been talking about, did I ask you to subscribe? Please subscribe. We've been talking about Joseph revealing himself to his brothers. And now in this parashah, in this Aliyah, he's going to be sending his brothers home to tell his papa. The papa. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit back into the third Aliyah, or back into the back into the second Aliyah. And it's saying here, it says, behold, your eyes see. So he's basically at this point trying to convince his brothers that, hey, I really am Joseph. Okay. And there's a statement here that he reveals to them his circumcision. That's just men in the room. There's not any ladies in the room. So, it's, I guess you could say it's appropriate. He shows him, hey, I'm circumcised. And of course, that would be a huge proof, because, what Egyptian monarch would be circumcised. Let me delete this right quick. Bam. All right. So, but then it says for Rashi, the circumcision which the brothers could see with their own eyes and the holy tongue coming from Joseph's lips constituted the two proofs that he was their brother. The second argument, however, is hardly convincing. So Ramban with an N, holds, since many Egyptians and particularly the leading dignitaries knew this language, but the fact which was to convince Jacob was that the viceroy, whom the brothers had seen with their own eyes in the midst of the glory and power, had himself ordered Jacob to be brought to him and fed along with the rest of his family, to spare them from distress. Okay, so we're talking about here, how do they know that this is really their brother, and more importantly, how is Jacob going to know? But then it says, as for proof that Joseph spoke the Lashon HaChodesh, which is Hebrew. Lashon HaChodesh is Hebrew. It's which, by the way, means holy tongue. Hebrew is the only language that is the divine language. I once met somebody. It's been a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. He was trying to convince me that the language. Now, it was a Christian person, naturally, and as I've often said, the Achilles heel of Christianity, the reason why it's an issue, there's a bunch of reasons. Let me just say that. But one of the reasons is that they spend their entire focus in the Pauline letters, like the letters of Paul, as they are traditionally understood and have been understood, which is the wrong way to understand them. That's where they live. That's their Bible. And by the way, that's true for Messianic Judaism, so-called Judaism as well. Nothing's different about it in terms of that. But this gentleman was trying to convince me that the language of heaven is going to be Greek. Can you believe that? I've heard some whoppers in my time, and that's one of them. But anyway, I digress. So it says, as for proof that Joseph spoke to Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, it is meant, says Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar, among other commentators, in the sense that the brothers had not recognized Joseph's voice when he spoke to them in the Egyptian tongue, but they recognized it when he spoke his mother tongue. Now, when I heard this, or read this rather, I immediately thought of what Yeshua said in the book of Yochanan, book of John, chapter 10, because in this case, we're learning that when he's speaking to them in the Egyptian tongue, pardon me, they don't recognize him. They only recognize him when he begins to speak to them in Hebrew. Isn't it interesting how many times I've run into people who, they've been believers for X number of years, in a lot of cases, a long time. And this is how people come to us, how Hashem leads them here. Let me put it that way. And that is that, you love God, you love the Messiah, you understand the fundamentals, but there's just something there's just something not right. There's something missing. You don't know what's missing because you don't know what you don't know. But it just doesn't sit right. I know that was our story. Part of our story, the Rebbe and I, that as we were involved, initially in faith, just things weren't adding up. This wasn't right. But then when you come to know the Messiah in his proper Jewish context, everything makes perfect sense. Everything starts lining up. You start to recognize his voice. And isn't that true? And that's I obviously am biased because this is the ministry that Hashem has given me, and so here I am. But I love it, and the reason I love Lapid Judaism and what we do here is because one of the greatest things about it is that I mentioned this term before. We don't use and don't have to use theological gymnastics. Everything makes perfect logical sense. All the dots connect. All the scriptural verses fit together. You don't have to, make stuff up. It's like somebody reached out on the channel, had a good question, a very common question. The question's not a problem. The person who asked it's not a problem. But I want to use this as an example. They were asking about, head coverings. I thought men weren't supposed to pray and prophesy by, you wearing a head covering, and it was basically asking us, whatever, to explain kind of the use of the kippah in Judaism. And I went on to tell this person that of course, that concept of men not covering their hair comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And if you study that out, if you actually study the scholarly research on that passage, look deep, take a deep dive into, now I'm not talking about, opening up your Bible and looking at the footnotes. I'm talking about actually like reading scholarly material from accredited people, like, in books and print, which I did a number of years ago. It's been a long time ago. I did that. And here's what you walk away with. And this is the absolute fact. You can take my word for it. I will not lead you astray. I promise. And that is, at the end of the day, the scholars, the historians, the researchers have absolutely no idea whatsoever what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Zero, zilch, not a nothing. They all guess, and sometimes those guesses make it into the translations, but at the end of the day, they have absolutely no idea. And what's more problematic about it is that for Paul to allegedly come along and say, men, you're not allowed to wear head coverings when you pray or prophesy, with a big issue with that. Remember, Paul died before the temple was destroyed, right? How many of you know that? He died before the temple was destroyed, which means that the Levites and the Kohanim were still working and functioning in the temple, right? Right. This means that they were still wearing the garments that God told them to wear when they were working, praying, and prophesying in the temple, correct? Correct. What were those garments? One of them was a head covering. If you worked in the temple, which was the place of God's holy presence, and in which you were working, praying, and prophesying, you were required by God to wear a head covering. So how is it that God now tells us you absolutely aren't supposed to wear a head covering? That would mean that God changed his mind, right? And God can't change. Is that correct? Of course it's correct. Now, the spiritual gymnastics, the theological gymnastics comes into play when people have said to me, yeah, well, that was before Christ died. But now that Christ died, now it changed. Well, still you have the fundamental problem of God changes, and that's you can't get around that. But let's deal with the other problem. I thought Messiah was crucified before the foundations of the world. I thought he was from everlasting to everlasting. So how is it that he changed? You know what I'm saying? So, and of course, that's an example of how we get to the theological gymnastic issue where nothing makes sense, right? So before, for thousands upon thousands of years, God wants us to cover our head as men. And by the way, there's lots of other sources in the Bible. You know, how many of you heard in the book of Isaiah where it says, "I'll give you beauty for ashes"? It's a beautiful song, isn't it? I'll give you beauty for ashes, and we sing that. We get all weepy and swoon. Do you know what the word beauty means? It actually means a head covering. Do you know why it says head covering for ashes, beauty for ashes? Do you know why? Who can tell me why? I'll give you 30. I'll give you 2 seconds. 1,000, 1,000. Beauty for ashes literally means a head covering for ashes. Why? Because was that chapter 61 or 61, I believe. It's talking about mourning. When a Jewish man is in mourning, he takes off his head covering and he puts on his head ashes. So therefore, when you're not mourning anymore, you would remove the ashes and put back on your head a head covering. Therefore, the prophetic word is, I'm going to give you a head covering in place of your ashes. I'm going to put your hat back on your head as opposed to the ashes that you're using for mourning. Now, I ask you, if God is saying, I'm going to put a head covering on your head in place of your ashes, and therefore you'll have joy, I thought we weren't supposed to wear a head covering. You see what I mean? This is an example of how Lapid Judaism is awesome because we actually use common sense and logic and things fit together. And we don't have to play theological football or games. And then, of course, you can also, and while we're on this topic, you can also read in the scriptures, you will note that any and every time a man is praying to God, he always, always, always covers his head. Always. As an example, when Elijah was at the cave, remember, there was fire and then there was shaking. But then he heard God's voice in a still small voice, right? Remember that? What's it say? It says when he heard that, he pulled his cloak up over his head. That's an example. There's others. But anyway, going back to my sheep hear my voice. In John chapter 10, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Now I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now this is where he talks about bringing in the nations. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. Now notice, I just want to spend just a few minutes here because in this scenario, if we would just read this material, we would see that the Jew and Gentile one in Messiah concept is just simply not tenable. Listen to what this is the words of the Messiah. In a lot of publications, these words are in red, okay? It says, I have other sheep, that's the non-Jews, that are not of this sheep pen. He's talking about the sheep pen that he's talking about right now is the Jewish sheep pen, which, by the way, is all the tribes. Every tribe is a Jew. It's not limited to Judah. Are you hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth? Okay. But then he goes on to say, I must bring them also. Now, this is critical because we're going to come back to something in just a second. I'm going to go back to our commentary on our Torah portion, and we're going to see that Joseph did the same thing. Joseph brought non-Jews into the sheep pen. And remember that Yeshua is Yeshua ben Yosef. He's the suffering Messiah, and he's saying, this is my job as the suffering Mashiach. My job is to bring in people into the sheepfold. Says they too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. Say one flock and one shepherd. Now the word one is a very mystical word, and it means singular one. not two. See, a lot of people read one and they think two. But I want to get really deep in this because one means one. I know it's you got to really kind of go into a deep level here, sod level, Kabbalistic thought. One means one and two means two. Now, if you have one, it means you have a singular. If you have two, it means you have two things. I'm being facetious here, right? Are we? But do you see what I mean? I'm going to have one flock and one sheep pen and one shepherd. And by the way, you can cross-reference this to Isaiah 56:8 and also some passages in Ezekiel 34, which basically confirm this. Now, you can't have, here's why the Jew and Gentile thing doesn't work. Well, first of all, they can't be in the same sheep pen. Because as I mentioned countless times before, it is against, as an example, scriptural law. It's against scriptural law for a Jewish man to marry a non-Jewish woman. So therefore, if you're in the same sheep pen, you can't get married. You can't, that doesn't work. You see what I'm saying? Right? So that right alone kills it. How are you going to have sheep in the same sheep pen if they're eating different things? So I'm a Jew and I eat kosher. You're a so-called messianic Gentile, whatever that means, and you don't eat kosher. How can we fellowship together? How can we sit down and have a meal together? Quite literally, how can we have a meal together? We know one time in a galaxy far, far away, my wife and I went to, excuse me, I'll take a drink of water. Pardon me. My wife and I were invited to go to a fundraiser gala at a hotel. Actually, it was I think it was the Marriott and Alliance. Not that that's relevant, you know, like my wife says, like the Rebbe says, Betty Crocker, Duncan Hines, it doesn't matter. But anyway, we were invited to go to this gala. We're raising money for a Jewish hospital in Israel, and there was going to be a famous guy that was going to be speaking and so forth. It was a big deal. So the people that were coordinating it were Christian people, very good, nice, friendly, wonderful Christian people. And they invited us to come and they asked us, do you want to sit on the Jewish side or do you want to sit on the, you know, the non-Jewish side, which includes messianics and so forth? And we said, and the Jewish side, of course, is kosher. So I said, well, no, Jewish side, 100%. So we went to this gala, and they literally in the banquet, in the ballroom, which is huge, they quite literally had the room completely divided, and they had a I don't know if it was blue or whatever, but they had this tape that went down the very center of the room. On the right-hand side was all the Orthodox Jewish people, and they were being served strictly kosher meals, okay, with all the precautions and all that kind of stuff. On the other side of the room was Christian people, messianic people, many of whom I know personally and so forth, that lead congregations and so on. They're all on that side of the room. On that side on the left-hand side of the room, they were serving, you know, non-kosher chicken, you know, cheesecake, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what we had to eat. I don't remember. On our side of the room, the only people who were there who were both Jews and believed in the Messiah was me and the Rebbe. That was it. And so the point of this story, aside from the fact that that's an astonishing, you know, concept, but the point of the story is, in that case, you have people eating kosher and people eating clearly non-kosher. How can, if you have to have a line down the middle of the room so that, you know, plates don't cross, and how can you have Jew and Gentile, one and Messiah? You see what I mean? Unless the one new man just erases the Torah, and therefore you don't have to worry about kosher because it's been done away with. You don't have to worry about tzitzi because they've been done away with. You don't have to worry about the holidays that have been done away with. You see what I mean? But God is saying, no, my sheep know my voice, and the voice of another they shalt not follow. So when the non-Jewish people come, they follow the Jewish Messiah, and they end up in a Jewish sheep pen. Now, something else, another interesting insight here, I thought it was interesting, is talking about the land of Goshen. Did you know that the word Goshen is equal in gematria to the word Mashiach? So to be in the land of Goshen is to be in the land of Mashiach. Now, why is it? Now we learn from the Torah that he Joseph is giving them the land of Goshen. And it's a beautiful land. It's wonderful for pasturing flocks and so forth. But the oral Torah brings down another insight that I find interesting as to why Goshen specifically was given to the Jewish people. And the answer to that equation, aside from the fact that Goshen means Mashiach, and there is obviously a prophetic meaning there. And this also, by the way, what I'm about to share would indicate to me why the plagues never touched Goshen. Aside from the fact, of course, that God, through his supernatural power, prevented them from doing so. That's quite obvious. But there's another reason, and that is that this is the land that actually had belonged to Sarah, the wife of Abraham. What? That's right. So what happened was, according to the ancient texts, is that Sarah, was kidnapped by because she had been apparently she was a Hebrew hottie, and the Pharaoh wanted her, and so he took her, and then of course God reprimanded him for that, and so he gave her back. That's where Abraham lied and said, this is my sister or whatever, and the scripture says she was given all kinds. Abraham was given all kinds of flocks and slaves and money and payment and all this kind of things. Well, Sarah was given, she was deeded Goshen. So, she had beachfront property. I don't know if Goshen is Goshen beachfront. I really don't know. Doesn't matter. But she was given this property in Goshen, and that's why Jacob gave it to the children of Israel, because, hey, this is your mother's property. Thought that was an interesting insight. We talked yesterday about shame. I waxed eloquently yesterday about don't let shame keep you from making teshuvah. Okay, we talked at length about that. But I just want to read this insight here. It's from Rabbi Monk's commentary that says, afterwards, the brothers conversed with him. Says Rashi says, when they saw that he cried and that his heart was sincere with them, his brothers spoke to him, for at first they were filled with shame before him. The Midrash Haggadol gives other details. Says, when Joseph saw the shame of his brothers, he tried to calm them, saying, it is not you who have sent me here, but God. However, this argument did not succeed. And it goes on to say, until they saw his tears. And I just wanted to share that insight with you. I thought it was, a very sweet insight. And it's a further reminder to each and every one of us not to let shame or pride prevent us from making teshuvah. There are many, many people out there who are needing to make teshuvah, but they're allowing pride and perhaps shame to prevent them from doing so. I was once having a conversation with Zake and Yigal, and we were talking about these types of people. And I was saying, why is it, you think, that people that realize that they're wrong, I mean, it's obvious they're wrong. They did XYZ for RSV reason, convince themselves that, the sky was falling or whatever the case was, or, this person was bad, or this relationship was no good, or, this job wasn't for me, or whatever the situation is. And after a period of time, it becomes painfully obvious that they were wrong. They were just wrong. The sky didn't fall. The job was for them. The relationship wasn't terrible. And their point of view was the wrong point of view. Why can't they just recognize reality and make teshuvah and just, kind of get back on track? And what prevents us? And Zakin's answer, I thought, was very profound. He said, well, because in admitting that in making teshuvah, you would have to admit that you were in fact wrong, that all that stuff you built up, all that fantasy you built up, that you made the reason for doing whatever you did, you have to come to the conclusion that you were wrong. And For a lot of people, I'd say for the vast majority of people, unfortunately, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say for 90% of the people at least, they just can't do that. And I just want to encourage you and I, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make wrong judgments. We're going to believe phony baloney, plastic banana, good time, rock and roll. We're going to believe it. And I want to encourage you to have the moral, emotional, and spiritual fortitude to, when you believe the lie, to be able to come back and say, I believed a lie. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Have that courage. That's how successful people become successful, guys. Successful people are not people who never make mistakes. Successful people are not people who don't, trip or slip or whatever. Don't ever think that. Okay. And so it's very important, because I just want to mention it again today, because I've seen it so much in my lifetime and I just don't understand it. And I think it's part of the culture where if somebody did make a mistake and then they come back and apologize, with tears or whatever, culturally they're mocked. Oh, that's not real. They're just saying that because they got caught. That kind of silly nonsense. Don't be that person either. Don't ever mock somebody's teshuva. Who are we to? I mean, it's funny how we say things like "judge not," and then we go about judging. Okay, one more thing here. I want to say this because it relates back to what Yeshua was saying about gathering people in. There's an insight that talks about, brings down, let's see here, different insights from the Talmud and so forth, talking about how the Jews took ultimately the best of the land of Egypt. So when Joseph says, I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and then he goes on to talk about Goshen and so forth, Rashi brings down that he was in effect prophesying without realizing he was prophesying that in the end result of this exile, you're going to take with you the best of the land of Egypt. And that includes, of course, gold and silver and so forth. But then it says, it says the sources bring down that they emptied the land in a figurative sense also. For they took with them all of the valuable elements of the Egyptian population. These were people who believed in God and who therefore joined the Jewish people as converts. Thus, they liberated all the, quote, sacred holy sparks which were smoldering under the embers. So I want to conclude with that, because I wanted you to see that Joseph's role ultimately led to the holy sparks, the non-Jews becoming Jews. That's how they emptied Egypt. And that's exactly what Yeshua was talking about in John chapter 10. Hey, thanks for watching today. Thanks for being here. I hope it was a blessing to you. I hope you learned some interesting things, and more importantly, learn some things that will help you and I both be better people. So, hey, look, I'm living the dream. You live the dream. God has us exactly where he wants us. And all we need to do is seek his face every single day and try to be good, decent people. Love you all. Look forward to seeing you mañana with God's help. Shalom Aleichem.